everyone. Welcome to the Guidance from Within podcast. If you're here, you are on YouTube, and we also have the Guidance from Within podcast available actually on anywhere you can get a podcast. So that's pretty cool. My name is Brittany. I am your friend and host, bridging the seen and unseen worlds of our reality. Today in this episode, we dive in all things palmistry and what it's like being a palmist. We have a beautiful guest. Her name is Paula Victoria. Find her at p.isforpalmistry on Instagram. Feel free to check it out and give a follow. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. We're going to talk about history of palmistry, what it means, what palmistry is across cultures, and also the future of palmistry and what that might look like. And she also gives a really fun tip at the end of the video about palmistry itself, so you can kind of do your own little palm reading at home. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Guidance from Within podcast. I have such a fun guest with me today, Paula Victoria. You can find her at p.isforpalmistry on Instagram. That is how I found you, through a mutual friend. I am so excited to start chatting with you today about palm reading and the work that you do. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited today to be speaking with you and to have this opportunity and platform to talk about my work and how I got here.
Yay! The Guidance from Within audience is going to love this. I already know they're going to love this episode. We've had a variety of healers and like a shaman and yoga instructors, but never a palm reader. And I wanted to start off and tell you and whoever's listening, like, why I feel so drawn to getting to know you more and the work that you do. In 2016, during my yoga teacher training, I went to India. I was in Rishikesh, India. And me and a couple of my friends were walking through these narrow streets in India, and we saw this jewelry shop. There are a lot of jewelry stores on these streets, but for some reason we went into this specific one, and as we go in, we meet the person at the counter, this young man, and I forget his name. I think it was like Nishu or something, and he was like, "Oh, welcome in. Where are you from?" "From the US, Norway," right? And he's like, "Oh, well, let me see your palms. I'll read your palm." And that was the first experience I had with a palm reader. And so I gave them my palm, and he was saying, "Oh, you're a writer. Like, you're a writer. You're going to be such a great writer. You're going to have 2 children. One of them might be from Jupiter or wherever, like what their sign will be Jupiter." And he also told me, like, many people are going to follow you in the spiritual work. And at this time I had just turned 21 and I was in college. And he's saying you have these chakras are open, or no, he told me you have 9 chakras. Most people have like 7 or 8. You have 9. And I was like, what?
Oh.
What are you saying? And so the funny thing is, I was like, well, everyone actually has 12 chakras. Because my esoteric healing background, I knew the energetics of the body. And so I said, well, everyone has 12 chakras, but that doesn't mean all 12 are open, right?
Oh, interesting.
So we kind of had a little argument, but that's what he told me. That's all that I remember. And so I'm like, well, whatever he was reading in my hand, I have no idea, but yeah.
That is so interesting. And I mean, I know that Vedic palmistry is very popular in India. I'm not as familiar with that type of palmistry, but it's really interesting to hear what he said about your palm. And then I know you sent me a photograph of your palm the other day because I was curious, and we talked about maybe discussing different lines or symbols on the palm. And a lot of what you said does show up on your palm for me too. So I just think it's really interesting, the crossover. Is it okay with you if I kind of share that? I know that we were talking about maybe discussing a little bit about that on the podcast, but I don't want to blast you out without your permission.
I would love to. And you know, what's going to be really fun for me is like you said, there are different kinds of palmistry. So if you want to share with us kind of the style, your style, maybe a couple of different ways, like I'm sure the man that I met, you know, was Vedic. His lens of reading palms was probably very different than your lens in a way of how he learned. And also, I'm sure that a bit of intuition goes into reading a palm. I'm sure it's not just like point A to point B. You know, I'm sure that there's intuition that goes into reading a palm. So I would love to hear about your story. I would love to hear about kind of the history of palmistry itself, and then what you consider, why you consider it to be so important. And I would love for you to share with us a little bit about my palm.
Yeah, definitely. I am very excited. And it was so amazing to hear your story too. I love hearing about other readings people have because it, one, lets me know where they are now compared to when they had their reading, and lets me know a little bit about their experience and where they come from with palm reading, because it shows, how open someone is and how interested and curious someone is about their life path. So I love sharing all of that. I'm excited.
Beautiful. Before
Um,
we keep going, wait, you just said something that made me think of a question. So
sure.
if I was to come to you every 3 years and
Mhm.
get a palm reading, would my palm change over time?
Yes. So I actually had a few people come back to me because they had big life changes in the last year. So I usually tell someone the soonest you can come back is every 6 months. And sometimes people will want to come back sooner and I'll do a reading, but there won't be as much change. So my suggestion would be every 6 months, every year. So if it's like a birthday reading, some people like to do birthday readings. So I think that's a really good suggestion, because when you receive a reading, it's not so much saying, your path is set in stone. This is it. This is what's going to happen in your life. It's more of a check-in, and it's more of a guidance of saying, this is where you're at. If you don't like what you hear, you're very welcome to change it. You're very welcome to change your path. And so a lot of people might hear something or see something on their palm. Maybe it's related to health, maybe it's related to their career. And they say, the next week, the next couple of months, maybe they think about it. Maybe it's sort of the seed is planted and they're like, well, I'm not really happy with what I heard, so maybe I should make some changes. And then a year later, it could be totally different. So, mhm.
Amazing. Okay, amazing. Thank you. I just was like, wait, I was blown away by that. Those kind of changes show up in your palm. Okay, continue. I would love to hear more about you and how you found this work.
Sure. So it's a little bit of a long and winding road, roundabout story, but if I could start with just framing out my childhood, I think that really sets the tone for everything. So growing up, I was always a very imaginative kid. I was just naturally intuitive, not understanding what intuition was. So it was very confusing. And I'm sure that a lot of people listening and you have gone through the similar experience of seeing things very differently, and then kind of being shut down by, friends or family members of, well, that was okay when you were a kid, but you're a little bit older now, so it's time to grow up, it's time to move on. So that was, a little bit of what happened. And I was raised in a house with my parents, but my grandparents raised me for the most part. And my grandmother was just a very romantic person. My grandparents met right before Pearl Harbor was hit during World War II. So it was very much this romance story that I heard growing up of, we met, and then a week after Pearl Harbor hit, we got married, and then your grandfather went off to war. And this was in the Philippines. So it was the Philippine version of this, typical US romantic war story. And so she loved to tell things through this very positive romantic lens. So I was used to hearing things in that way. And she was also a very open woman, and we spent a lot of time in nature, in the garden. And she always would listen to me. We would have our conversations there, and was very understanding of maybe how different I was before I realized how different I was. Um, I would say things like, is everyone safe? Just out of nowhere. And then she would ask me, well, why are you saying that? And then she would go inside and maybe make a phone call to check on people, because you never know, or I would know this person's going to call, we should be near the phone, and little things like that, where I just had a feeling and I would say it because I didn't know any better. Um, and so in school, I never had a hard time making friends, but I was always kind of very overwhelmed, I think. I loved learning and I was very excited to be in school. But then when recess hit, I was really frustrated because I didn't want to play. I wanted to keep learning. And at recess, different kids would come up to me and just kind of unload what was going on in their life on different levels. So while it might not have always been a very serious topic, it was just a lot for, one kid to hear different things. So there were days I would come home from school and I would feel really frustrated or overwhelmed, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't really understand why it was happening. And if I think on, I did another interview and I said, you know, if I had gone back to that point in time, I probably would have understood and listened a little bit more. But at that time, I didn't really know. And so I loved to read at recess because that was my way of kind of learning, continuing my learning and shutting down. So I would check out books from the library and I would sit at the playground, and sometimes the teachers wouldn't let me, but for the most part, they were okay with it because I was having fun in my own way. So one weekend, my grandparents took me to a garage sale and they always let me buy one item. And so this one weekend in particular always comes back to me where I found it was like a replica necklace that someone probably bought at a museum of a Athens coin, like an ancient Athens coin with on one side is the owl and then the other side is Athena. And so I picked this coin up and it was like I found treasure. I felt like Indiana Jones, and this was like my discovery. And then I was going to be a famous archaeologist, and I made up this whole thing in my head. And I kind of asked around about what it was about. And then I checked out this book for recess the next week about ancient Greece and mythology and, you know, the afterlife and the in-between. And that was my first introduction to something outside of my bubble growing up. It was just knowing that there was more out there was so refreshing, and it made me feel so much better, I think, of myself and where I stood at that time. I didn't feel so other. And so that was my first deep dive into everything. What was I going to say next? See, losing my train of thought. As always, glad that I have my notes in front of me. So that was really a way for me to connect to life and death differently, I think, and our path in life differently, because it was viewed much differently than, you know, what I learned in my Catholic Christian household. And I never really felt connected to that. So feeling connected to something, I think, is very important for everyone. I think everyone hits that point in a different time in their life. And that was my first way into it. So my grandmother would play different games with me, I think, at home. And just being very imaginative, I loved it. So we would play Guess Who's Calling game. Every time the phone would ring, she would ask me to guess who it is. And it was kind of like the psychic card thing, like guess what's on this card, which I'm not good at that. But I could always guess who was calling, and she loved it. So she kept doing it. And I think it creeped my mom out. And and then she, every once in a while, and I didn't remember this until last year, but every once in a while she would talk to me about palmistry. And I didn't know it was palmistry. She would talk to me about the main lines on your palm. And she was not a palmist. She learned from someone in her neighborhood growing up and in her early adulthood that would come house to house and read the family's palms. And so, which I just learned all of this last year. But she would teach me about the basic lines of the palms. And I think that gave me a better lens of understanding emotion and understanding what was being unloaded on me and understanding what I felt without knowing that other people weren't feeling these things, sort of like in this empathetic way of just sponging in all of these things. So I was able to analyze and put and kind of, you know, add some logic behind what was going on. And I think my mom also, she must have shared this with my mom, and I'm not sure if my mom remembers growing up, but we had books around the house that were probably picked up at just the local bookstore of, you know, Palmistry 101 and that kind of thing. So as a child, there were a lot of pictures because it was just pictures of palms. So I was so interested, and it was easy for me to pick that up. And that was just my early lens of palmistry. And then as I grew up, I dropped it because I was told, this isn't okay. This is a form of divination. We were going to church every Sunday. So, you know, hearing from church friends and classmates, oh, that's devil's work. That's not appropriate for you to do anymore. It's not a game anymore. So I kind of let go of all of that. And then I didn't pick it back up again until I met my fiance in grad school. So we met in school. Actually, much like my grandparents met in college. So, which I think is really, I didn't think about this until yesterday. And she, on our first date, we were classmates, but then we went out for dinner one night during a late night studio session. And I used to, on first dates, say, "Can I see your palm?" And usually people would be really creeped out, or they would think nothing of it. And then, you know, it would be 1 or 2 dates and then it wasn't important anyway. So she was so intrigued. And I loved what I saw in her palm, just a very warm, caring person, very close to family. And I don't think, besides just doing it on dates, it hadn't really been a part of my life. And she was so intrigued, and she very much saw palmistry as my gift, as a way of seeing people differently. And so I think she mirrored that back to me and kind of reminded me of why I was so interested in it before, and a way of channeling that. Because at that point in my life, I was very much just working. I was living in New York, and it was grinding all the time. I didn't have time to really focus on my inner thoughts at all. And I didn't realize that until moving away from New York. But now that I'm able to step back and see that, my life was just all about work and the external. So slowly she kind of started, for lack of better terms, pimping me out as a palmist to friends at parties. She was like, "Look what Paula can do. Look what Paula can do. Let her read your palm. Give her your hand." And I'm like, this is so overwhelming. It's never a good idea for me to drunk read palms at a party in college. It's not as helpful, and it's not as intimate. So don't ever ask me to do that. But it was a good way for me to get started and to get over this uncomfortability that I had with being open to other people. It was kind of opening myself up again, which I hadn't done in a long time. And I had no idea why I felt so good about it. Like something just sat right with me, where at that time I wasn't thinking of things in that way. I was just looking straight ahead. I wasn't really thinking about anything beyond my day to day. And so something felt like it wasn't there. So I was kind of doing that here and there, for friends. If someone would ask, if it came up in conversation, I would say, "Oh, I can do this." And then I stopped all of 2020. So this was just for a few years that I was dabbling again, and I was loving it. And it felt good every time that I would read a palm and I could just talk with someone about what they wanted. And it was like that little kid at recess, but I knew what to do with it. And so the first 2 palms that I read were, it was an Instagram reconnection of a college friend. And she had mentioned something about learning palmistry. So I messaged her and I said, palmistry is something I can do. We never talked about it in college because I kind of shut that off. But if you want to discuss it, if you want any book suggestions, I'm happy to connect with you and talk to you about it. So she reached out, said, "I would actually love for you to read my palm." And she's across the country. So I said, "Well, okay, maybe you can email me some pictures. I think that might be enough. You can just text them to me, email them to me." And so she did. She said it was very accurate. And she said, "Well, can you read my wife's palms?" So I said, "Yeah, sure. This is great. I'd love to." I was very honored. I was very humbled by it. I didn't really know any accuracy to what I was doing at that time. It was just half intuition, half reading what was actually there, a little bit of nervousness mixed in. And so after that, they said, "Wow, this is great." Then that was it, right? And then I went to bed that night and went to sleep, woke up, usually just to go to the bathroom. And then I went back in bed and I felt like someone was there. And I thought that I was half asleep. So I kind of just laid down, relaxed again. And then there was just this this voice all of a sudden on repeat. And I was just like, I felt like I was having a hot flash, like I was very hot. And this voice on repeat was just saying, trying to teach her to help him. And I couldn't move my body at all. And I was freaked out. Of course, I go to the worst case. I think, "Oh my God, I'm having a seizure. This is it. Like, I can't, tap my fiance who's next to me to let her know something's going on." And then as soon as I try reaching for my phone, I can move, and I just put it in my phone and I go to sleep. And I wake up the next morning almost forgetting it happened. And then as soon as I remembered, I reached out to the girl that I read the day before. And I said, because we were talking about spirit guides. So I said, well, does this sound to you like this could be your spirit guide? I don't know how to tell this to you. I hope you don't think that I'm crazy, but I think I have a message for you. And so she said, that does not sound like my spirit guide. And I said, well, okay, well, there goes that friendship rekindling. And she said, but I think I know who this is. I'm going to talk to my wife. So apparently the person that was speaking to me was the aunt of her wife, who was talking to her about something that meant something to her. I had no idea what it meant at all. And so she said, well, thank you for reaching out to me. I'll let you know if anything comes of this. And the next night I go to sleep again, wake up, the same thing happens. But it's this whole other message. And it's just talking about, it felt like it was more of a different energy. It felt like it was a hot again, which was confusing for me. So I was just really hot, didn't know what's going on. And it felt like a game of charades, and it was very playful. And I have no other way to explain this except it felt like a game of charades, because it was, can you guess what this means? Can you get to it? Can you understand? And then there was like a smacking on the back of the head. And basically she was just trying to tell me a story. And then the same thing on repeat happened where she said, can you remember? Or can she remember? And so I wrote the whole experience down and shared it the next day. And apparently it was very relevant to this person who I was sharing it with. I said, this is what she told me. I don't know what it means, but hopefully it's helpful to you. And so after that, I didn't really know if I was a palmist. I didn't know if I was a medium. I didn't know if I was going crazy. I was feeling very insecure, and didn't know if I was maybe doing the wrong thing in reading palms, or maybe it was the very right thing. So I only confided in a few people. This is what happened to me this week. I don't know what this means, but it's really exciting. And felt this presence with me all week of this woman's aunt.
Wow.
And yeah, it was amazing, and it was frightening, and I was scared, and I had no idea what was going on. And so in my head, I was thinking, well, that's it. My experience of mediumship up until this point was like Cleo. Like I thought that I was going to be some hotline psychic, because I had no idea what was going on. And so I just kept kind of meditating on it and putting it out there. Is this what I'm supposed to do? I just went to grad school. I just spent a lot of money learning a whole other kind of skill that has nothing to do with this. How can I use this to help people? And then all of a sudden I was walking my dog, and this huge gust of wind kind of came and just said, well, she's not ready yet. And then it stopped. And this was last September. And after that, I said, I'm going to keep doing palmistry. I think I need to put this out there, and just, even if it's a hobby, because this can be my way of helping people. I was at home. We're still in lockdown, but it was in the middle of lockdown. I'm not a frontliner. I felt like I had no way of helping people, guiding people, and I felt very lost just being a work from home 9-to-5 person at the time. And so I was very excited to have the opportunity, but I think I was so frightened at that time that everything just kind of shut off. And I had no way of doing that besides reading palms. And as soon as I started my Instagram, it just felt like this gigantic community opened up. And I'm sure that you also understand that. Just feeling this warm embrace of, okay, like here's some of your people understand what you're doing, people want to hear your message. And for me, palmistry is just this humbling experience of being able to connect one-on-one with someone and guide them through whatever they need at that moment. It became something very much outside of myself, where I could, forget about what was going on with me and just open myself to someone and be able to guide them with whatever question they had, or maybe just give them what I see in their palm and let them run with it. So I know that was very long-winded, but for
It
some
all,
reason, like, sorry, go ahead.
well, it all comes together.
I'm glad that you think so.
Yeah, it does. It all comes
But
together. I mean, it's interesting because I'm always curious as to how people go, like, what drew them into the work they do. And for some, it's, I was 25 or I was 30 and I had this huge awakening, or I went through a breakup, or this whatever event happened. And it's interesting because your story mirrors a lot of my own, and I find it fascinating. I totally can relate to that relationship, that connection you have with your grandmother, and how she was kind of helping. um, it's almost like she wasn't putting the thoughts into your head, but she was playing with the thoughts you already had, or the skills you already had, and seeing where you could take it. And
mhm,
my grandmother as well taught me the energy healing work that I do. So it's like, my
that's so
grandma
cool.
has this funny saying that she thinks it skips a generation, like I don't know, like whether it's like the gifts or the spiritual tools or what the belief, right? Whatever it is, uh, she thinks that it skips a generation. So it's funny
That's
how,
so funny.
yes, your story totally reminds me of mine. And there is such a beautiful connection between us and our grandmothers, and kind of them helping us pave the path to get to where we are today. And I really love that. So thank you for sharing. What's interesting to me is to hear you talk about too, a couple of things. It feels like you were so drawn to ancient Greece for a reason. I'm sure you might have had past lives there. Do you think that?
Yeah, I think so. I was actually talking to Ashley, my fiance, about this yesterday, because I was kind of walking through what I was going to talk about today with her. Because I said, okay, I know that sometimes I go to this place of verbal vomit. So can I just run through some bullet points with you, and you tell me if this is too much? And she said, I wonder if you were in ancient Greece with my father in a past life,
Mm.
because her dad studied in ancient Greece. They're Chinese, but he went from China to ancient Greece, and studied there. And he has this fascination with it too. And we always talk about ancient, like Greece together. And I've never been, but I've always felt connected, totally.
Yes, when you say that, I just get these chills. And what I want to ask you too, along that, um, do you think you've had a past life of being a palmist?
I've actually never thought about that. I have never done with a practitioner past life regression or anything. I've never done that, but I have done a few self regression like experiments, kind of. I don't know if I did them right, like I don't know, but I had these deep experiences of a few past lives, and none of them I was a palmist,
Mm.
none of them I was Christian. So there was just this underlying belief. It was more of like a pagan past life, or ancient civilization past lives, where it was more of like gods and goddesses. But I've never experienced me as a palmist. I don't know.
That's
I
okay.
have a feeling I was a healer at some point, but I don't know to what capacity.
Yeah.
But they're just feelings.
Yeah.
No confirmation. But
No, that's fine. I hope that wasn't too personal. It just made me think
no.
about it. With the work I do, I don't know that I was necessarily like an Akashic Record Reader. I
Hmm.
do believe I've done similar work, right? Like maybe it wasn't
Hmm.
like that specific, but yeah, it just fascinates me too. Like hearing your story, I'm just curious. I'm
I'm
just
curious too.
yeah. And I had another question I wrote down here.
Sure.
Do I see? Oh, yeah. It's kind of, this is what I gather from your story. It's almost like you've always been intuitive. You've always been able to read energy, right? People pick that up about you. These little kids knew that about you, or else they wouldn't have felt comfortable enough to go to you and share their stories with you, right?
Hmm.
Like this kind of empathic, sensitive, intuitive little girl that I'm imagining you to be, right? Or that I'm like in
Yeah.
my head. And it probably was easier for you to not go play with the other kids because you're already overwhelmed by the energy around you. Why would you want to expel more energy around other people? So I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful that you knew at such a young age intuitively that what you needed was to distance yourself during that
Hmm.
15-minute recess. What you
Yeah.
needed was to distance yourself. How beautiful to be so in tune. I don't think uh, I feel like kids are very in tune, but I feel like a lot of them just try to live up to the expectation of what they're given, right? So
Hmm.
I find that to be like a beautiful part of you growing up and knowing what was good for you and what you needed. And then how that you weave that into this almost psychic awakening. It sounds like almost this psychic awakening where all of a sudden you start reading palms again, and it opens this door for, and I don't want to call it like quote the other side unquote, but it feels like that practice of palm reading, of starting that practice again, opened this kind of door for information to flood in from this other realm, from this other place.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be so scary for me. I'm just saying, I can go into the records and become kind of a medium, but to just be laying in bed at night and to have that happen to me, I would be
Yeah.
scared because it's a boundary issue. So one thing is,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, this is my own personal space. You know, this is my home. I want to feel safe in my home. It would almost be, this is what it is for people who are like, oh, I would love to be able to have that happen to me. What I want
Yeah,
to
no.
get, yeah, what I like, people who don't have experiences like that might think it would be something interesting to go through. But what I think it is very similar to, it would be like someone opening your front door,
Mm-hmm.
coming into your house while you were sleeping. It's the
Absolutely.
same kind of intrusion. And yeah, so I think the work that you do, kind of that opening door, and it's so beautiful that the wind came and was just reminding your world, your experience, any other spirit or being that was trying to communicate to you, telling them, hey, she's not ready. Calm down, like she's not ready.
And I
Right?
don't know if it was the same person. It kind of felt like it felt very different,
Mhm.
but I had no idea what was going on that week. But yeah.
Confusing, so
Yeah,
confusing.
it's still confusing.
Yeah, and so
But
tell me, is it accurate that it feel, because what I have had these almost weird, I have had many dreams where there would be ghosts, and not ghosts, but just earthbound spirits that I work with. I do this work all the time where I'll have earthbound spirits in my apartment. And it's not that I'm fully awake and present, but I'm in a dream state, and because I'm not in my body in that dream state, I can see them. And
oh,
it's
interesting.
almost one of those things where I'm going, hey, what are you doing? This isn't your home. Like, do you need help getting home? Right? Like,
Yeah.
do you need help getting home? Like, I can help you with that. And so when I wake up, I clear my apartment, I clear my home, because I've been in a state not in the body to be able to see what's there. And so, yeah. So do you agree that it is, that experience is like someone opening your front door and just coming in? Is that what it felt like?
Yeah, it totally felt like that. And I think I didn't, and I, now that that happened, I hear about similar experiences, maybe not exactly the same thing where, you know, you're told to just say to whoever is there, this is not appropriate for you to be here, or can we do this another time, and just kind of put that message out there. But it totally feels like that. You know, I imagine if I woke up to an alert on my phone that you know, my front door camera went off or something like that.
Right.
It was the same kind of feeling, and it wasn't a threatening experience. It was like if your friend just opened your door, kind of, rather
Like a
than,
shock, like almost an
yeah.
intrusive shock. Like no matter who it was, it would still be almost like you're in my space. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't invite
exactly.
you here. Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, you're, it does not have to be scary, but that initial contact can be, especially if you weren't aware, especially if it was your first time having it happen, you know, like trying to understand it.
Yeah, so I guess to kind of frame it out too, it wasn't my first experience with, I mean, I don't consider myself a medium in any way. So I
Mhm.
don't want to, I don't want this to turn into, well, you know, now Paula's a palmist and a medium. Like that's
Right.
not my place. I don't feel like that, you know, I can't help you with that. But um, when I was a child, another thing my grandmother would kind of listen to me about is like, I would kind of know when someone was in danger. When I said, you know, like, is everyone safe right now? There were a few times that I kind of had a feeling someone passed away in the family.
Mhm.
And a few, and in my family, this, when someone passes away, someone says, did they visit you? Did they come to you in a dream? And this kind of superstitious way of looking at things. But there were a few times as a child, and I hear this a lot with children, and then they grow up and they kind of grow out of this. And I don't know if this is what happened with me or if I shut it off, but there were a few times where I did experience loved ones coming to me, but it was never a message. it was always just, oh, look, there, I see them. They're right there as a kid. And it was just very light, more imagery, or it would be in a dream. Kind of like what you're talking about, it would be more dreamlike than a very direct message. So yeah, it was my first time where someone was giving me a direct message, and there was no visual though, where before there was more of a visual, and that's all it was. And it was very much the reverse, where it was words and feelings, and like I cried at one point without knowing where that came from, and smells. And I think smells have been a big thing, weirdly. But that's been it. It has not happened again. And I don't know if it was just very important in that point in time for that person. So
Yeah, and also just not to wrap that up, but also just to say, like, who knows where you'll be in 5 or 10 years, right? Like, who knows the work that you're going to be doing? So
mm-hmm.
when you're ready, if that is work you want to go into, you'll be ready when the time comes to do it. But for now, I think it's really important to know you're not ready, to put the boundary up, and to know you're fine where you are.
Yeah, I think so. I think they were right, whoever they were.
Right. It's like almost you had like a guardian angel or a spirit guide being like, okay, guys, go somewhere else. She's not
Yeah.
ready. You're overwhelming her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. I just wanted to dive into that more because I find it really fascinating. Yeah. Great. I'm curious. So, palmistry itself, we're going to get into kind of more details of it, but I'm also
Mm-hmm.
curious if you know any of the history surrounding it.
Sure. I love history. So I'm just going to kind of touch lightly on this because you can really go into it, and it's questionable as to what is accurate because it's seen through a certain lens, right? So I think where it really starts is that people have always been interested in hands. Hands have always been this symbol of like a signature, right? Of saying I am here. So our first, not really recording, but our first experience in prehistory of seeing hands is on caves, because that was our way of expressing, and that was our art. So you'll see caves in Spain or in South America of palms alongside of maybe animals that are painted onto walls, or landscapes or stories. And they're all different. So it'll be a little palm, it'll be an adult palm, and it's just this beautiful combination. So I think that's kind of where it starts, of people knowing the importance of their hands and understanding that they're more than just a body part. Because we're not putting our foot on a wall. We're not, like rubbing like our whole body pressed up against a wall. It was always a hand. And so that was 10,000 plus years ago. And I'm sure that it went on way before that, but that's what we know. And so about 4,000 years ago, our earliest sort of recordings in, recorded history of palmistry record the origins in India and in China around the same time, which I think is really fascinating because they're used for totally different reasons, but kind of a similar way of reading the hand. So in India, it's Vedic palmistry. And I'm not as familiar, so I can't really share too much about what Vedic palmistry is, but it was just the study of the lines and more about, what's going to happen in your life, maybe your family, and guidance. And so that's what was happening in India. And then in China, a few things. Palmistry was mainly used as sort of a diagnosis. So doctors and, any sort of healer would look at the palm to see if there were markings for any health concern. And it would be one of the ways that they would guide someone towards a certain type of herb or any kind of medication that they would mix up for them to heal. And also, what's interesting is the lines on our palms change all the time, like we talked about earlier, but our fingerprints stay the same, which is why, in the US where we use them as identification. And in China at that time, emperors would use their thumbprint to sign very important documents. So it was an identity relation there. And so they understood very much the importance of the hand. And then from India and China, palmistry spread through the Middle East. And, during all the various wars, and nomadic people would kind of go through the Middle East. And then that's where we kind of get this notion of the gypsy as the palm reader, which you see in artwork a lot on my Instagram. I like posting these depictions of different people reading palms in art throughout time. And while palmistry was traveling through the Middle East and through to the West, different famous people in time, and he's famous, like they're historical celebrities, like Aristotle picked up palmistry and passed on. This is totally a story that I've heard. Who knows if this actually happened like this, but I like to kind of imagine, this is the little girl again coming out, imagine that Aristotle then found this palmistry book and then kind of ships it to Alexander the Great and is like, look how cool this book is. I think that you would really love this. Why don't you use it as your battle tactic guidance? And so Alexander the Great was a huge, huge fan and enthusiast of palmistry, apparently, and used that to guide his conquering. And then up until the Middle Ages, palmistry was just a normal part of life. And then the church shut it down. It was a form of divination. They said, this is not okay for you to do. Palmistry is a sin. And from the Middle Ages, so like, I don't know, like 1000 up until 1500, to the Renaissance, it was just a no, like you were not supposed to do it, and it was wrong, and it was very much underground. And I think at that time the keepers of palmistry were those traveling groups of people, were, gypsies, if you want to call it that. And they continued it, and that's how the reputation of palmistry being something that these old cryptic women would do came from, because they were the only ones who felt that it was okay, because they weren't part of the church, really. So in the Renaissance, they started recording it in paintings, and it was a fascination. It was an enlightenment of palmistry is a science, and palmistry is something we can use to understand the human body, the human form, our gifts, and it's an art. So it was started being seen as a good thing again, and not being as much underground. And then it wasn't until the 19th century, so like the 1800s, that it started becoming a literal science. Like the Victorian era, people would study it at university and apply it to just normal meetings with people. And there were books on it. And I think one of the famous palmists is Cairo, that was his nickname, William John Warner. And I think how I like to imagine him is he was just this very enthusiastic personality. He was like a celebrity who people gravitated towards, and he was a palmist, and he was very good at it. So that's kind of how it became popularized. He made it kind of this celebrity fad. I mean, that I don't want to word it like that, but it became sort of this cool thing that,
Trending.
Yeah, that people could do, and they could go see him, and it was amazing, and he could tell you your whole life. And I know Mark Twain went to see him at one point and was like, oh, it was incredible, and he really like showed too much of me, and I'm embarrassed now, but it was fascinating. And so that's kind of how it came back.
That's awesome. Wow, what a history. I also found it fascinating when you're talking about how, well, the church has condemned so much, right? But the connection between you growing up in a Christian household, but incorporating palmistry throughout growing up with your grandma, and how you just told the history of how, the church has a history of condemning palmistry and saying that it's like sinful, but yet you were able to kind of weave it into growing up in a Christian household. And I find that to be really beautiful. And actually, I find that to be healing in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Be healing almost, that throughout history that kind of combination wouldn't be allowed, but now it was okay to have both, and it was seen as something fun to do, not something sinful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I find that really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. That is fascinating.
Yeah, when you're talking about this, I'm just seeing that link of like how that could be healing for, because if we zoom out, how that could be healing for palmistry and the science of palmistry, how far
Mhm.
we've come, right? Like I'm sure, back in that middle age area, if you were to be a palm reader in a Christian family, you would have been outcast and shamed, and who knows what
Mhm.
else, right?
Yeah.
Today you
Mhm.
can be and still be a Christian or still be, you know, whatever you want to be. So that's awesome. Wow, thanks for sharing. That was really fun.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so my other question I had for you, and we've touched on this a bit, but I think we can dive into it a little bit more. We chatted about this before we came onto the call, but I want to just go back into it because I think it's important about how people kind of categorize this kind of work, categorize what is palmistry, what is an intuitive reading, what is this kind of energy healing, and so we try to categorize it. Do you feel, and I know there is an intuitive aspect when it comes to reading a palm, it's not just going from point A to point B, like I'm sure if I was to get a palm reading from 5 different people, there would be differences, right? But there
Mhm.
wouldn't be differences if it was like doing math and just measuring a line on your hand. So talk to me a little bit about that. What would you consider palmistry to be and how it's moving us forward, and how maybe in the future, what do you think palmistry is going to be? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's so interesting. I'm always so stuck in history that I never think of, where is it heading in the future? Because that wasn't too long ago that it was okayed again. It didn't get a stamp of approval for history until recently, and it's still a little taboo, obviously. But and I think something that's very interesting is when palmistry started, it was not a form of divination. It was seen as a science, like we talked about.
Mhm.
And so now, because the most recent history frames it as such, as a form of divination, and it is considered a form of divination, um, that's how people approach it. But I do believe that, and I know other palmists see this, and everyone has a little bit of a different opinion, but our palm is like a map of what is inside of us. It's just our interior makeup, and it is a map of yourself and your life path, and it can change over time. So it's not really like this map. You don't go into this, I'm bringing up Indiana Jones so much, but it's not like you go into this cave and you're an explorer and you find this ancient map and that's it, and that's your whole life story. It's not like that. It's more of like a Google Maps where it just updates over time when, a satellite comes over and it's like, oh, looks like they made some changes, like looks like they're eating a little bit better. Let's switch up this map a little bit. And recently I have been connecting it to, and I know that I've seen a few palmists connect palmistry to more relatable modern things so that it is approachable for people. And for me, I'm an interior designer. Like my normal weekly job, I don't read palms full time. That would be amazing. But I do love what I do, which is interior design. And so palmistry is very much like a floor plan. So our hand can be a floor plan of what's going on the inside. So it's our interior design, it's our interior makeup. And this is something that I've just been exploring more and more lately. So if you think about it, like you buy a house, it has X amount of rooms, it works for you for a little bit. And then you decide, well, I kind of want to open up the living room to the kitchen, which is a big thing now, like open space plans, open floor plans. I just want to open this wall up. It's kind of like saying, well, like I want to travel the world. And so you get these travel lines on your palm and they pop up, or just the curiosity. I've been seeing a lot this year. People have a lot of travel lines because everyone has that itch to get out there again and no one can do it to the capacity that they used to. So it's just funny. But basically, it's just your tool. It's your tool to see what you have at the time, see how you want to change it. And I think moving forward, to answer your question, I would love to see palmistry be a tool that is taught to people more. I don't know if that looks like a course in college, like an elective, or if it's like a hobby that you can pick up, like painting or like an instrument or something like that. I would love to see that. And I have been getting a lot of requests from parents to read their children's palms. And I was always kind of taught in the background that, like, I don't know, it's, there's always the danger of reading a child's palm for this or that reason. And like, one being, you don't want to tell them this is what you see, because then they'll be stuck with that. They'll think, oh, I heard from this person that I'm supposed to do this. You don't want to put the idea in someone's head at too young of an age that this is what they need to be. And also, a lot of people still see it as a taboo thing. So you don't want to introduce something, so terrible to such a moldable mind. But I would love to see palmistry be a tool for children to see their gifts early on as just a launching point. And just that, just a launching point to see what their strengths are, what gifts they were given in this lifetime. Because how amazing would that be to learn from a very early age, oh, you could be a really wonderful teacher, or you're so intuitive, you should practice that more. Or I can see that, maybe you would really love painting, maybe you would be good at that. Or maybe you would really love science, and just kind of be a nudge, because it's so confusing, especially now, to have so many options available to you. And especially in this last year, I've seen these wonderful parents or guardians who are at home with their kids, and they're taking lessons on Zoom, and everything's on a screen, but it also opens up so many more opportunities for them. So that's a blessing and a curse, right? Because on one end, you have more opportunity to try different things that aren't locally available to you. But then on the other end, there's way more that's available to you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also part of history too. Like 2,000, 4,000 years ago, you didn't have technology like this. You didn't have all of the options we have. And now it's a little bit muddied. You have so many options. So why not use, your maps to know where to start?
Your maps. I love it. Use your maps. And one
Use your
thing that's
maps.
interesting too is if health shows up on your hands, how amazing would that be to learn about palmistry just from a standpoint of looking and going, what's my health? What is my
Mm-hmm.
health like in my body? Let me look at my hands. That's like, that makes me really curious about health and the future of health and what that looks like. And one thing that palmistry reminds me of, the more that I'm hearing you talk about it and learn from it,
Mm-hmm.
actually reminds me of astrology. Like it's almost like the stars, the map of our stars are written in our hands in a way. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Actually, in palmistry, and I know it's a podcast, and I know we have the video, but it's a little hard to explain, like with just words. But to sum it up, your palm has different mounts and different areas that are named after the planets, actually. So
Oh,
it
okay.
is, yeah. And some people will use astrology more in your hand, and some people will say, well, it's just the planets and that's it. Don't make it about the zodiac and all of this. And but it is related to the planets, and it's more of the personalities of the planets, if you will. So like you were saying about your palm, you have was it Jupiter? You mentioned
So
Jupiter.
I was told that I would have two children, and one of them would be affected or from or influenced by Jupiter. I still to this, that was 5 years ago, and I still have no idea what that means.
So I can't tell you exactly what he meant, but it's
Okay.
to me that sounds like your Jupiter fingers, your pointer finger. So this is the Jupiter mount, and that is the mount of leadership, of healing. So I mean, not of healing. I'm sorry, of teaching.
Of teaching.
So maybe your child will be a teacher. Maybe he'll be an important leader who will teach us about something, or he or she, he, she, they. But yeah, I just think that's fascinating. I usually don't read about children on the palm, so I always think it's interesting when people see that.
Right. And so would
Mhm.
Vedic astrology use more, or sorry, would Vedic palm reading use more of astrology?
I actually am not that familiar with it, so I'm not
That's okay. I was
sure.
just wondering because I know Vedic astrology, right? So would that, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I would love to learn too. So
So how about we get into it because we're chatting about it. Are there any examples you could share with us? I know I sent you a picture. So for everyone listening, we will have an actual Zoom video recording on YouTube that's posted. So if you have the audio pulled up right now and you want to switch to the YouTube version, I'll leave the link below, and that way you can actually see what Paula is showing us.
yeah, all the hand motions
Right.
going on.
And the pointing to the hand part. Yeah. So what would you like to share for some specifics? Maybe something fun for whoever's listening to go. You could tell them to look at whatever line and see what they see.
Yeah, so I'm going to use you as an example. Surprise, but not surprise, right? So I asked Brittany to send me her palm because I was guessing she would have a line that I wanted to share today on the podcast. And I was right. She has this beautiful, beautiful line I love to see called the sister line. And it's not about sisters. The sister line is sort of a guardian angel line or a spirit guide line. And so I guess for the YouTube version, I will hold my hand up, but I will describe it. So this is your lifeline, right? Which is here. Everyone's lifeline looks a little bit different, but it's the line that kind of goes around where your thumb is. And if you Google it too, lifeline will pop up. It's the line everyone is like, when am I going to die? Which that's not what it's about. There's a thinner line that's on the inside of your lifeline sometimes called the sister line. And Brittany has this line, and it's basically this beautiful line that shows that someone is watching over you.
Are you
And
talking about that one?
yes,
So this
yes,
is the life, and then this
that's
is
the
the sister
lifeline.
line, and I have ink on my hand, so ignore that.
There's the writer in you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so sometimes people will have one line, sometimes people will have multiple of them, and they can be long, they can be short, and they can correlate with different points in your life. Maybe there's a point where you needed a little bit more support and guidance.
Mm.
They can be on your left hand or your right hand or both hands. So and it just means that you have sort of a guardian angel watching over you, or a spirit guide, or several spirit guides watching over you. It could also mean that you have a wonderful connection with your spirit guide. So sometimes I see this and someone knows very much who their spirit guide is, and they not rely on them, but they are able to connect and ask for guidance from them very easily. So seeing that line means you have that potential, or you already do it. And so of course you do it, that this is your life's work. So I think it's really beautiful you have that on your palm. So for anyone who's listening or anyone who's watching, I think that that would be a really great line to see or to have. And so if you don't have this line, I don't want you to think I have no spiritual connection, I have no spirit guides. That's not the case. It can just mean that maybe at this point in your life, it's not something that your spirit guides think is necessary for you to know. You know, I mean, it's however you want to interpret it. But I think in just seeing the line, it's just that extra reassurance.
Wow, very cool. And
Mhm.
so with lines like that, would it matter if a line looked like it went deeper into the skin or if it was lighter? Does that actually change the message?
Yes, it does change. And I don't know if it so much changes the message, but it can mean maybe you have a deeper connection, or let's say that sometimes lines will start very strong and then, you know, get a little bit lighter as they go on, or vice versa. And I think at different points in time, maybe you feel more connected or less connected, or maybe you're not as grounded at a certain point, maybe because you're stressed. So, so yeah.
Wow, so cool. All right, thanks for sharing. I'm hooked. So I would love to kind of wrap up this beautiful episode today with asking you to share with us, what does it look like for P is for Palmistry? When are you going to start taking bookings again? Because I will be one of your first to book for sure.
Yeah, I'm so
And
excited to read you.
yes, do we have a website? Do we have somewhere we can go to find out this information?
Yes, so I am taking a little bit of a break for April and through March. I was taking a bit of a break, and then the beginning of May, I will start taking booking readings again. So I have on my Instagram May 1st, so hopefully that's how it goes. And I only have an Instagram right now, but hopefully by May 1st, I'm working on putting together a website. I just keep getting asked, for people who don't have Instagrams, how can I reach you? So my hope by that point is that I will have a website and an easier way to schedule bookings with me. And right now, I know some people, some readers do Zoom meetings where you're on Zoom and you can kind of discuss the palm and they pull up their screen. So if that's something you're interested in, I'm happy to give that suggestion for you. I know a lot of wonderful palmists who love doing Zoom readings. Right now, because of my job, I'm not able to have normal office hours. So I do my readings through PDFs, and I will ask you to send me your palm, and then I will send you back a 2 to 3 page PDF reading that's very intensive and shows you about your personality, any questions you have, a little palmistry 101. So that's how you can get a reading from me right now.
Great. So you kind of will overall, starting in May, look at the palm. Do people need to tell you what they're looking at specifically? Do people need to go, hey, Paula, I can't wait for my session. I would love for you to look at health, relationships, career. Like, do they need to be that specific with you?
So you don't have to be, but I have a little questionnaire that goes out when you book.
Perfect.
That asks, I like to ask more questions than less, which sometimes people get overwhelmed with, but I think it's very important. So I ask, is there anything specific? Do you have specific questions?
Mm-hmm.
And I let you know if I can't answer the specific question you send before, so you're not waiting and then I don't answer it. So I let you know in advance. And then I also ask, is there anything that you don't want me to tell you? Because since it's not on Zoom and it's not in person, I want people to know in advance I'm not going to shock them with anything, which usually is not the case. It's not like a shocking kind of thing. It's more about who you are. But I don't want people to be scared to come to me for a reading. So I give that option. Usually people say, just tell me everything. I want to know all the dirty details. But you have the option of not hearing something.
That's really good. Yeah, great. You're like, you can have boundaries. You can have boundaries during this.
Yeah, it's important. See? Boundaries.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Awesome. So Paula is on Instagram at p.isforpalmistry. And then do you want to share your email right now?
Yeah, you can if you want to reach out to me. My email is the same as my Instagram. It's p.isforpalmistry@gmail.com.
Perfect. So it's like the same. Yay.
Same thing.
Well, we look forward to May 1st or whenever it is that you are ready for that. Because I know it's like 2 jobs. I know is that extra workload. Trust me, I get it. So whenever you feel ready, I'm excited. Sign me up. And just thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me today.
Thank you. This was amazing. It was so fun talking with you and sharing this part of my story. It was, I think, very healing for me just to get it all out there. And it was wonderful to hear about your story. I can't wait to follow along and hear more and read your palm. I can't wait.
Me either. Can't wait. Awesome. Thank you.